headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
There are some who think we should have been Vladimir Putin's friend, and now he is our enemy as a result of us not doing that right. What do you think of that?
I agree. I'm afraid. I think we should stand up for Ukraine. I think we should do more than we're doing now. But I think a number of windows of opportunity have been missed very, very badly. Do you know that on 4 occasions, Soviet Union and Russian leaders have tried to join NATO? And on every occasion, they've been rebuffed with a kind of contemptuousness. And, you know, we were probably right to rebuff Molotov in 1953. But when Mikhail Gorbachev proposed joining NATO in 1990, that was the time, and Yeltsin a year later in 1991 and then 1993, that was the time when we should have shown a bit of magnanimity, neutralized any possible later threat from Russia and brought it into the fold. We had one more chance, and that was in 2000 when, in a conversation with George Robertson, who was then head of NATO, Vladimir Putin said, "You're going to let us into NATO then, mate?" And Robertson said, "I'm afraid you have to apply to join NATO, you know." And Putin said, "Well, stuff that," as you would imagine he would.
Yes.
And from that moment on, Russia became entrenched in its eastern redoubts of making friends with China, of becoming an Asian-style autocracy, and moving away from the West. So we have had chance after chance to bring Russia into the fold, and we've failed. Now, however, different kettle of fish, I grant entirely. You know, whatever the excuses of the past, we have to do something meaningful to stand up to Putin, and my suspicion is that we won't. I don't know what you think, mate.
Yeah, well, you know what I think is it's interesting that NATO has kind of ceased to be what I thought it was, which was the protector of the North Atlantic, because clearly that's what it's meant to be. That's what it's meant to do. And I think it's been weakened over the years, partially by the inability of a lot of the people in it to get a fair deal for many countries. You know, Britain and America has been paying far too much money into NATO and getting very little out of it, to be honest. And it doesn't really seem to be good for anything anymore. You know, it's become a bit like the UN peacekeeping force. It kind of does a lot of talking, but not much else.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's not quite as fatuous as the UN, but it's certainly heading in that direction. I mean, at the moment, the member states of NATO who care about NATO is, as you say, the USA and Great Britain, and, of course, the likes of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, who do provide their share, by and large, of money. It is, as ever, Western Europe that is letting the side down. And it's all complicated by the various vain aims of leaders such as Macron and Merkel that there should be a European defence force, which was, incidentally, one of the ideas behind NATO back in the early 1950s, that it should be a force to protect Europe rather than simply, you know, an alliance between the Anglo-Saxon countries. But no, it's become dilatory and it lacks conviction and unity.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that it would have been smarter, would it not, Rod, for NATO to bring Russia into the tent as opposed to leaving it outside, running around, being able to do whatever it wanted. And the end result seems to have become that we are now more reliant on Russia for energy than anything.
Yes, Sorry, I'm not feeling 100%.
Well, I hope you feel better. Have some Lemsip.
Yeah, no, it's only you see, I've given up smoking because I wanted to do something very green.
Well, there you go. That's what's happened. That's what happened to me.
Now I've got a cough. You know. Anyway, mate. No. I think the point is here that if we had brought Russia into the fold in the early 1990s, which was absolutely clear we could do that. You know, it was absolutely clear that we could do that. We would now have a bulwark against China. We would have Russia on our side against China. We would have Russia on our side against radical Islam. Now, all the problems that we have seen over the last 20-odd years would have been alleviated a little by knowing that we had the Russians on side with us. And instead of doing that, we sent our venture capitalists over to Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was briefly, and had them involved in asset stripping of the huge state institutions, which led to two massive depressions in Russia in the 90s, and meant in the end that the Russian people kind of thought that democracy might not be that good an idea. You know?
Yeah. And there's been an awful lot of people over the last few days that I've been listening to, Rod, talking about the whys and wherefores of Ukraine, whether there is in fact any sort of Russian rump, if you like, of ethnic Russians who want to be part of Russia. You know, this move into these so-called, separatist areas is all very confusing for most people who are not experts in the field, and even different academics don't seem to agree. But I certainly believe that one of the main catalysts for all of this trouble was Angela Merkel's offer to Ukraine to join the European Union, because that was never on the table when the Soviet Union was split up.
No, I think there's not much doubt that the European Union, in particular, Merkel, behaved appallingly and kind of gave a green light to a Russian state, which has always, throughout its history, right back to 1200, been paranoid about the threat from the West, and has made at various times across this 700, 800 years overtures to the West and tried to become Western, and at every time we've either invaded it or told it to get lost, right. With contempt. But by the same token, Putin knows that he can get away with doing what he's done now because he got away with it in Georgia and he got away with it in Crimea. Now, there is a case in Crimea, and I think we all knew this, that actually it is largely ethnic Russians. But Luhansk and Donetsk, not quite the same. You take a vote there, assuming it would be free and fair, it would be very even between the Ukrainians and the Russians. But, we'll do nothing. The problem is, when Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, got away with diverting an aeroplane to Minsk with an opponent of his regime on it, right, and imprisoned that man, and did so illegally, we did virtually nothing. Right. And that would have been the time to stand up against Putin and his allies.
No, exactly right. And as far as the sort of London grad story goes, because there's been a lot of talk of that too, Britain, it would seem, has been rather, shall we say, reluctant to crack down on Russian oligarchs, on Russian money, whether it's dirty or not, on the whole, McMafia kind of scenario. All of that's been going on for certainly at least one decade, if not two, hasn't really helped, has it? I mean, everybody said to Boris Johnson the other day, well, surely he should have blocked the sovereign wealth fund that America ended up blocking just yesterday, the VEB. But there's an argument which is made which says actually Britain rather likes Russian dirty money.
Of course it does. I mean, you look at the number of properties in London which have been bought up by very, very affluent Russians, almost, a large proportion of whom will be involved in criminality somewhere down the line. Yeah. And you can see that this is one of the problems with standing up to Putin now, that almost everything we do when it comes to financial sanctions and so on hurts us probably more than it hurts the Russians. I don't want to plead a special case here, mate, but I've got to order some oil for this rafting
Good
house.
Good luck on the price there.
I'm going to go out begging. I mean, the price of the stuff. Yeah. And that's only going to get worse, and it's going to get worse. The gas prices are going to get worse. And of course, we have benefited. We have benefited massively from Moscow on the Thames.
Yeah, absolutely. And Medvedev said just the other day, did he not? The guy who used to flip-flop around between being Prime Minister and President and now does something else in the Council of Russia. But he's basically saying, well, you better get used to paying, 2,000 euros for what you used to pay 1,000 euros for in Europe, because that's what we're going to do. We're just going to stick the price of gas up. So it's quite an interesting game. I still don't really see it turning into a proper war, though, do you?
No, I said no, but largely because of our spinelessness. I mean, there is a case for saying we should do that. One of the things we could have done was send more troops to the Polish, Lithuanian and Estonian borders, both American and British troops and European troops, to at least give those countries a degree of feeling of security. Because Putin's aim is to re-establish effectively the Soviet Union with, instead of a communist elite, a kind of gangster elite at its prow. And one suspects that Ukraine will not be last. I mean, he's already talked very clearly about how Ukraine shouldn't be a separate country at all. And there's some historically, you could argue that Russia shouldn't be a separate country because Russia began in Kiev.
Right.
That's where Russia started.
Right.
There's an argument for saying that Ukraine is Russia. But if you were Latvian, you would be very worried, and that the same kind of setup exists in particularly Latvia, where there are towns on the Latvian-Russian border which are ethnic Russian, 75% ethnic Russian, and have in the past claimed about being discriminated against by the Latvian government. And that's exactly the sort of area where Putin could move into next.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.